Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter, and today I want to do a video showing you some of the basic supplies of watercolor painting. What you basically need to get going on this wonderful hobby of watercolor painting. So let's start with the basics. The first thing you need are paints. And I have a palette here. It has a very big lid, so I can use all this area for mixing. And then my paints I have arranged inside my palette. Let me take the tubes out of here. So you can see my palette. We've got rainbow order going around here. Now I don't recommend you start off with this many colors. I've been painting for almost 30 years, so I like to mix it up a little bit. But usually on a painting I still only use 4 or 5 colors. Even though I have all of these colors here, I usually only use about a half a dozen or less, and then I mix to make all the other shades I need to use. So you want a big plastic palette, and you want to arrange your paint in rainbow order, but I strongly suggest you stick with the basic colors to begin. Your basic colors would be ultramarine blue and phthalo blue, alizarin crimson and cadmium red, lemon yellow and cadmium yellow. That gives you a warm and a cool version of each color, and I'm going to show you why we want that a little bit later when we move over to the technique part of our video. Also, I like to have my beginners start off with some sap green and some burnt sienna, because those colors are just gorgeous, and although you can replicate it, the hue, with your other colors by mixing them, they have a lovely sedimentary granulation effect when you use these colors, so it's nice to have those on your palettes as well. Now, of course, after we paint, we need paper. After paint comes paper. Paper comes in sheets, which are about 22 inches by 30 inches. These are just some that I've cut down a little bit. Or pads, like this field journal. It's got a nice hard cover, so if I take it out to paint, I can, just set this on my lap and I have a nice surface to paint on. Or blocks. And blocks are my favorite, and I'll tell you why. They're like a pad, but they're attached, they're bound on all 4 sides. So you basically do your painting, and then you cut off the top sheet by sliding a palette knife or a butter knife or your fingernail in. There'll be one little gap that's not attached, and you slide your palette knife in there and you pop off that top sheet, and your next sheet is pristine and ready to paint again. And it also keeps your paper flat because it's bound on all 4 edges. So painting blocks, I really recommend them. Paper comes in different finishes. The most common would be 140 pound cold press. That's what I recommend for all my beginner lessons that you can find at my Graphico and Lindsay Stamp Stuff. It's a basic paper. All the manufacturers make 140 pound cold press. It's easy to find, and the brand I prefer is Arches, but you may try other brands and see for yourself what you like. I recommend going to an art store and purchasing a few large sheets of paper and cutting them down, practicing on them, experimenting, and see what suits your style best. Now let's take a closer look at my setup so you can see the brushes, and you can see the paint tubes in action. You can see a little bit better what I have going on here. Here is my painting desk, the way I have it set up when I'm painting. I'm right-handed, so I have 2 buckets of water to my right. This will be opposite on the screen because the camera is in front of me, but the reason I have 2 buckets, I have 1 bucket for dirty water. I always wash my brush in the bucket closest to me. Then I've got a bucket for clean water, so when I go to mix up some new colors on my palette, I pick up water from the clean bucket and I use that to mix. And actually this bucket is kind of nice. I believe it's by Lowell Cornell. It's got a divider in the middle, so I can actually have dirty water and clean water in 1 bucket if I like, and it's got little places where I can rest my brushes. So that's really handy. Now brushes can have either wooden handles or acrylic handles, and I really like the acrylic handles for a couple of reasons. For one, they've got a nice scraper on the end, and that's really handy for scraping out color or for scratching in darker lines. So that's really handy. And these acrylic handles, if you accidentally leave this in the water overnight, I'm a mom and I get distracted often when I'm painting, or I have to stop really quick because the kids are getting off the bus and I just kind of forget and I leave my brush in the water. Well, if I find it the next day, if it's a wooden brush, the wood is going to swell, the paint's going to crack, and the ferrule, this metal part here, is going to be loose. And then it's pretty much going to wobble whenever I paint, and it's going to be miserable. It's not going to be a good brush. I'm sure I have lots of examples of when I've done that. I should have grabbed one and brought it over before I started. If I come across one, I'll be sure to show you it. But anyways, you could leave this in the water and it's not gonna, the glue's not gonna come loose generally, and this brush handle will not swell, and it will stay good as new. This is a Royal Aqualon brush, and I like the Aqualon line. So if you're in the craft store, and even the craft stores usually carry this brush, or if you're in an art supply store or you're shopping online, I like the Royal Aqualon and the Royal Majestic brushes. The Majestics have a black handle. They're really more designed for watercolor. The Aqualons can be used for watercolor or acrylics. They both work great. You can't go wrong with any of the brushes in those lines. The brushes I recommend are a 1-inch wash and a 1/2 inch or number 12 wash. And your number 12s, actually all of your flats, you can either get with a straight across flat or you can get it at an angle. And some people prefer the angles because they're just a little easier to get into details. But it doesn't matter. I usually just use the flat. It's up to you, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Now, my palette here, I know my palette by heart. I know all the colors I have in there. And so when I go to paint, I can instinctively know that that's cobalt, and that's ultramarine, and that's Prussian blue, and that's phthalo blue, yada, yada, yada. But when I first started out, I actually took a piece of masking tape and I went around the edges of my palette and I labeled each color with a permanent pen. That way I knew when it was time to fill my palette up, I could get the proper color and I wouldn't put cobalt in the ultramarine slot or Prussian blue in the phthalo blue well. So it just keeps my palette nice and organized, and I lay my colors out in rainbow order. Now as a beginning watercolorist, you won't need this many colors. I recommend 6 colors that I told you about earlier. And you may be wondering, well, do I want to get these, the artist grade colors that can cost anywhere between $6 and $20 a tube, or do I want to get a set of student grade paints that I could pay $8 and get a whole set? Well, that's up to you. If you feel like if you buy the artist colors and you're going to be so worried that you're going to waste them, that you don't paint, then go ahead and get the student brand until you are comfortable with your paints. Now, like this inexpensive set was $8, and you'll see you still have 2 yellows, a cool and a warm, 2 reds, a cool and a warm, 2 blues, a cool and a warm, and then you get a sap green and a burnt sienna. So you get all your basic colors in an inexpensive set like this. This is by Art Advantage. The Reeves brand is really good. I would recommend picking up those if you're unsure about what to get. It's a student quality set, but it's a really good one. And the other advantage about using student quality sets, other than not worrying about wasting them because they're not so expensive, is that the paint is non-toxic. So if your kids come by and they want to paint a little bit, or if you accidentally dip your paintbrush in your cup of coffee while you're painting, you're not going to drop dead from cadmium poisoning. So that's always a good thing. Also, if you like to make your own spray inks, you can add a little watercolor paint and water in a bottle and shake it up and spray it and not worry about breathing in harmful chemicals. I'm going to show you, I thought this was funny when I read this, bought a tube of paint a few minutes ago, right here, cobalt blue. It says right on the tube, warning, this product contains a chemical known in the state of California to cause cancer, birth defects, and other reproductive harm. Well, boy, I'm sure glad I don't live in California. Apparently it's fine to use in Maine, but in California, watch out. Yeah, you don't really want to be ingesting that stuff or breathing in the fumes if you sprayed it or accidentally, sticking the paintbrush in your cup of tea and, dropping dead from cobalt poisoning. So that's another thing to be aware of. But when you're shopping for colors and you're in the artist supply store and you're looking at the expensive tubes of paint, you might see something that says cobalt blue and it's $20 a tube, and next to it you see something called cobalt blue hue and it's $7 a tube. You're probably wondering what's the difference. The difference is the pigment they use. The expensive one is using real cobalt. The hue usually says in parentheses HUE is using a synthetic substitute. So you'll get basically the same color. It may granulate differently, which means the particles of the synthetic may be different than the particles of the true pigment, but it will generally give you the same color. And I'm giving you absolute permission to buy the hues. They're actually less toxic and will look just about the same. So go ahead and buy the hues. Some paints you can't even get the natural pigments anymore, such as Indian yellow, which used to be made in India. And it was made from cow urine, and they would withhold water from these cows and collect the urine, and that's what they made the paint from. But thank goodness, enlightened people realized that was cruel, and they stopped doing that. So there you go. There's a basic color overview. So we're using a warm and a cool version of every color, and I will have a supply list on my blog that you can print off when you go shopping. Alright, so brushes are flats or rounds. Basically what you're going to use is a flat or a round in the beginner painting classes. This is a large 16 round. I like big round brushes. I find that I could paint a whole painting with a big round brush. But most people are a little uncomfortable with that, so what I recommend to start off with is a 1/2 inch flat, an inch flat. That's a 3/4. That's not, an inch is a little bit bigger than this. And a number 6 round. Now, when you buy your round brushes, you're going to take it out of the package and you're going to see that it's got this little collar on it. Take that off and throw it away. Do not put it back on your brush because you're more likely to ruin your brush than you are to save the tip of that brush. You want to rinse out the sizing, and your brush should have a nice snap to it. This is an Aqualon. It's a very nice brush. It was a brand new one. That's why it still had the collar on it. You can actually see, though, when they put the color on it, it actually got a little stray hair there. If you end up getting a misshapen brush, you can wet it, put some dish soap in it, and shape it, and let it dry, and that will bring it back to its glory. Alright, now these are synthetic brushes. Synthetic brushes are very nice. They do hold quite a bit of water, more than they used to, and that way if you're worried about not wanting to use natural bristle brushes for, you know, ethical reasons, the fur that they use to make brushes is a byproduct of the fur industry, so you may not want to support that and use that. So these synthetic brushes are really quite nice. And this brush, I apologize for talking fast. This brush is the first brush I ever owned. I got it when I was 7 years old. That's nearly 30 years ago. It is a 1/2 inch golden Taklon brush by Alvin, and it works just as well as the day I bought it. So take care of your watercolor brushes. They will last you a lifetime. Another good brush to have is either a mop or a Japanese hockey brush. These are natural bristles. This is like a hog bristle, would be a byproduct of, you know, pork. But they do hold quite a bit of water for washing a background. Some people really like to have these. If you do decide to buy one of these and you're in the store, give it a little tug. If any hair comes off in your hand, put it back. Do not buy it because it's going to be in your painting and it's going to drive you crazy. So there's a little tip for you. If you're buying a brush at an art shop and you can't tell what kind of brush it is because it's stiff and it's got sizing in it, ask the shop owner if you could rinse it out and feel the bristles. They should let you do that. And then, of course, buy it if the bristles don't come out in your hand and it's got a nice snap. Alright, so I'm going to show you how to make a color wheel. And I'm just taking a compass, and I've got this 140, actually no, it's 90-pound cold pressed paper, and I like to use it first for just when I am, you know, practicing. It's rather smooth, and I can even stamp on it if I'm using a, you know, pretty open line work stamp. So stampers out there would like that. It's by Fabriano, and it's very inexpensive. Just as contrast, I want to show you this handmade Nunjabi watercolor paper. See how textured that is? It's perfect if you're painting something weathered, like an old barn or like a rusty truck or something like that. You know, the iconic watercolor paintings. This is a really nice paper to use for that. So they come even smoother than this paper. Hot press, made by papers that have been rolled under hot rollers after they've been made. Cold press has gone through cold rollers, and rough hasn't really been pressed at all, and that's why it's nice and rough. So anyway, back to making a color wheel. I want you to draw a circle. You could trace a plate. I'm just using a compass. And then you want to divide it into thirds, roughly. That seems to do the trick. And I'm just going to make some lines out for my center point. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm lousy at dividing things in a pie chart type fashion. Alright, so I should be using a proper pencil, but I'm not. Let's just say red, yellow, blue. So then I go to my palette and use my trusty, nearly 30-year-old brush, and I'm going to mix out the colors. Now, here is my lemon yellow. Now, if you are using, you know, student grade paint, and maybe they've called it, you know, neon yellow, or they've called it warm yellow or cool yellow, you know, that's fine. It doesn't matter what the name is, as long as you have a warm version. See how warm that looks, like sunshine, and see how that looks cool, like lemons? As long as you have a warm and a cool version, you'll be fine. Ultramarine, which is a warmer blue. It leans more towards purple. And then we've got phthalo blue, which is cooler, leans more towards green. See the difference there? It's more of a turquoisey, more of an ocean color. And then we've got our reds. We've got crimson, which is a nice pinky red, and then I've got cadmium red, which is more of an orangey red. Or it could be vermilion, but you can really see the differences in these colors, and you're going to see really why. Well, we got some glare on top of crimson here. Let me just slide my palette over. All right, so for the yellow, wash my brush, pick up fresh water. I'm going to pick up, did I say yellow? I'm going to pick up the lemon, and I'm going to put it on my color wheel right here next to the word yellow. Clean off my brush, pick up fresh, and I'm going to put my cadmium yellow, or you could use gamboge, or whatever your warm yellow is. I'm going to put it on that side kind of nearer to the red, and I'm going to do that with all my colors really quickly here. I'm going to try to work quickly so my paint stays wet on my paper, not taking my time. So you'll see, since the colors are leaning one way or the other naturally, they're going to be easier to mix. It'll make sense once you see them mixed out. I think I've been dipping in my clean water when I shouldn't have sometimes here, so just excuse that. Whoops, that's the color I want there. Okay, so if I want to make purple, if I mixed this phthalo blue in this cadmium red, I'm going to get kind of like a mucky gray that's not going to be very nice. But if I mix crimson and ultramarine, I'm going to get a lovely purple. Okay, see that? Lovely purple. Now let me just show you the yucky purple. Yucky purple, if I mixed this red and this, look, it's like ick. It's like marine gray kind of. Look at that. Yuck. But you might want that color, so it's important to know what your colors do. All right, I know I've dipped into this one for dirty water, so I'm just going to go back to that. I mix some orange with my cadmium red and my cadmium yellow. Get a nice lovely orange. And I would get more of a peach. If I use the crimson and the lemon, I'd get more of a muted peach color. More yellow in there. A nice yellow. Nice orange. Geez, do I know my colors today? Alright, and our lemon and our phthalo make a lovely spring green. And it's fun to mix your colors and see what you come up with. Now the other two colors that I mentioned I like my students to grab while they're at the art store is burnt sienna. It's such a pretty earthy color, and it's one of the less expensive ones because it's an iron oxide color. Iron is relatively cheap as far as pigments go. And sap green, which is just a very pretty lively green. And you'll see when it dries, it actually kind of sediments and has a really nice look that's a little bit different than the mixed green that you have. So those are just really great colors to have. And I want to show you a fun trick. My favorite gray is made by mixing burnt sienna and ultramarine. It just makes a beautiful, misty kind of oceany. The oceans in Maine, if you ever go to the Atlantic Ocean up in Maine, you get this very foggy kind of color in the water and in the sky. It's just this very kind of cool, dark, gritty gray, and that's kind of what you get right there. Okay, now let's go on to some techniques. Now that you've learned a little bit about color mixing and using the split complementary system, let's go on and do a few techniques. And that's why I'm using this practice paper, because it's inexpensive and I can just kind of toss it. I'll probably use the back for practice later. So one of the best techniques I like to share is side loading. And this isn't a traditional watercolor technique. This is really a toll painting technique, but it works so well that it's handy and I like to show my students. So I've got a clean wet brush. I'm just going to dab it and I'm going to stick a corner into my color. On my first lesson available called Learn to Paint Birch Trees, we do side loading. And you get a nice gradual blend. It goes from dark to light very naturally. That's called side loading. And if you want to be fancy, I'm not exactly sure where you do this, but just for funsies, you could double side load. You can get a fun little gradient. You know, maybe for a background on a card or something. Why not? All right, another thing I want to show you is a wet into wet wash. And I'm just going to wet over this because I don't really need to keep it for anything. So what I would do is just wet my paper, usually with my largest flat brush. Of course, I am not even attempting perfection here. I just want to give you an idea of the technique. And if I was doing a sky, I would have my dark close to the top, and I would just kind of let it fade out. Notice if I'm working on dry paper, how I get a hard edge. See up here, hard edge. But on the wet paper, I get a soft edge and it blends. Pretty cool, huh? And say I wanted to have some, I just wanted to put some local color in. I wanted to have a little, maybe some green at the bottom. I'm just going to let it kind of blend out, get my background in, and just kind of let it blend out. I know I'm going to paint some more stuff on top. I don't want it to really be too obvious, but I just want to get some color in there. And you can tip your paper and let it blend around and do its thing. That's called wet into wet. Now while your paper is wet like this, you can do something that is called lifting. And you want to, like say if I want to make clouds, I would just kind of press my dry paper towel and throw a few clouds in there. I'm working upside down and very quickly, but you get the hang of it. You get the hang of it. That's called lifting. You never want to rub wet paper, or it is going to it's going to pill, and it's going to stain, and it's just going to look yucky. So that is lifting. And I like paper towels or tissues for this. Cotton towels don't seem to work so well. So that's lifting. Now sometimes you want to have a little more control, and you want to do a controlled wash. And in that case, let me just kind of draw a square roughly here. And you generally use this in smaller situations. You wouldn't do a whole background with this technique generally. And you want a really juicy round brush. This is pretty big. You probably wouldn't use a brush this big for this small area, but I'm going to. And you mix a large, let's use some purple. I'm going to mix a large amount of purple there. We got some cobalt blue happening. I better not drink that. Okay, oh, this is a pretty purple. Okay, so you need to make sure you have enough paint mixed up to cover the area you are going to do. And this is when you want a really uniform wash of color. And what you do is start at one of the edges, usually the top, and you want to fill that with as much paint as you can. Now notice that my paint's not running away, because the paint is only going to go where the paper is wet. When we did our wet into wet wash, notice the paint didn't want to go off the edges. It only wanted to go where it was already wet. So once we have this bead of color saturated, we want to tip our paper, and you want to kind of work, keeping that bead of color to the edge, and work our way down. This brush is big, so it carries a lot of paint and water. Now I could probably paint this whole area with what's in that bead and what's on my brush. When you need to, if you do need to add more color, you just add it into the bead, so you're always working on the wet edge. This is called a controlled wash. And when you get to the end, you need to get rid of whatever you have left, or it's going to blossom back. So you dab your brush on a paper towel to take all the extra, and then you just stick it in the puddle, and it's going to drink up that extra paint. So that's what you call a controlled wash. You can do a controlled gradient wash. Of course, I would just, let me show you two ways to do a gradient wash. All right. So let's use the purple we were just using. And we'll start at the top like we did before. And we will load that right up with our purple, and we'll start bringing it down. The reason I tipped my paper is so that that bead of color is going to stay right there on the bottom. Now we want to start fading it out. So I'm going to grab some water, and I'm going to add water into that, and I've got to make sure I quickly bring that color down, or it's going to backwash on me. And so then I can bring that down, and it's going to get lighter as we go. But I don't like how suddenly it goes from dark to light. So what you can do is just wet the paper with clear water. And you can kind of like hold it to the light and make sure it's shiny everywhere. Then you know you've gotten all the area wet. And I can see the shiny. And then you can go in and add your color to the top. I'm totally breaking my bucket rule here, so you'll have to bear with me. Add your color, let it just, I just love the way it looks when the color goes, so I tend to use this kind of wash a lot. And I can just let nature take its course, let gravity take its course, and let it run down. It's two completely different looks, depending on what you want. So whether you want controlled or whether you want more of a free-form look. Those are just a few basic techniques. Another thing I like to have in my painting arsenal is a toothbrush. And I like it because I can pick up color and I can draw my finger across and I can spatter. I love that. I like having natural sponges because they are really nice for doing bushes and shrubs and texture. And you can just, you know, cut it. You can even cut up an old kitchen sponge and use like a cello sponge for doing some texture too. You know, it gives you different size blobs. These are great to have. Just rinse them out when you're done. This is a fun brush that I made out of rubber bands. I took a bunch of rubber bands and bound them together, and then I just cut off the loops. And then this funny brush makes fun little textures. Pick up some of this contrasting color here. You know, so there's all sorts of things you can find for free that will make marks in your project. Another thing I love is, oh, I could show you this too. When you use the end of a brush, you can scratch dark lines in, or you can scrape out light lines. So that's something you can use with the end of your brush. And I also like to have a bit of a cut up credit card because that's really good for making marks as well. Let me see if there's something else I wanted to show you. Oh, painter's tape. You should always have this on hand. It's great for masking. It's great for taping your paper down to a flat surface to work, because if you're just using one sheet of paper, it's a good idea to have it taped down. And then when you take your tape off at the end, it gives you a beautiful edge. Let's see, anything else? I think that's about it for basic supplies and techniques. I do hope you check out my classes at my Graphico. They're just printable painting packets with all the instructions you need to do lovely projects and learn how to watercolor paint. Thank you so much for watching.